Here are your headlines for the following hour, guys. It's all about China right now. They're in a big-time free fall in their markets. And in fact, the Shanghai Composite down nearly 30% since mid-early June. Forget about Greece. China, obviously, a big cog in the global economic composite there. Their big problems mean big problems for your money. Also, that deadline in the nuclear talks with Iran just hours away, but extended. Nevertheless, Secretary Kerry says it could go either way, but they're sounding more optimistic. I'm not sure we should be. And the CEOs of Aetna and Humana told me yesterday that healthcare costs have been going down for years. Surprise! And that, well, guess what? We're going to get a reality check from one of Obamacare's biggest and smartest critics. Hour 2 starts right now. All right, guys, let's go back to Greece. Let's start there because there was a headline from those talks early on. We've got Ashley Webster in Athens. And Ashley, do the Greeks have a new proposal or not?
Well, there has been reports that Greece have shown up in Brussels empty-handed, but now the Greek government says that is not true. What they've done, they say, is resubmitted the proposal that was given to them last Tuesday by Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the EU Commission. They say they've resubmitted that with some amendments. Now, don't forget, that was the offer that was on the table last Tuesday, and then Greece walked away from it, saying it's just not doable. The question is, what do they want? Do they want debt relief, something that the IMF says Greece has to have in order to be sustainable? Don't forget that the debt to GDP ratio right around 177%. So I don't think we're going to get anything today as the EU finance ministers and then the big summit tonight will decide what to do. But certainly the rhetoric so far going into these meetings hasn't been very encouraging at all. Meanwhile, here in Greece, life continues to be, well, somewhat difficult. Although when you look around the streets here in Athens at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it all looks very calm, all very peaceful. There are lines at the banks. The ATM lines have certainly gotten longer as people try to get their 60 euros, sometimes only able to get 50 euros a day. And those capital controls will be in place at least through the end of tomorrow. And of course, if Greece doesn't get a deal, there's going to be a real serious problem for the banking industry and the financial system as a whole, Charles. We are hearing reports of food shortages. I haven't seen that myself. And also the stockpiling of medicine by some pharmacists. But overall, it's just a wait and see. And as we look around the streets of Athens, we've spoken to people. They are very concerned, as you can imagine, but they almost shrug their shoulders. To them, there's no good option, and they've been putting up with it for 5 years. So we'll see what comes out of Brussels.
You know, the scene behind you, Ashley, looks so tranquil, and it might be the ultimate calm before the storm. Yeah. All right, buddy. We'll come out and talk to you again real soon. Thanks a lot. Right now, though, folks, let's check on the big board because we opened up maybe 20 points in the Dow. As you can see, it's given a lot of that back. And the only major news that I saw was perhaps the situation with Greece meeting in Brussels empty-handed or with the same proposal that was obviously rejected before. Not negotiating seriously is scaring the rest of the world. Also want to take a look at oil. Hammered yesterday, down 10% in the fourth show. Well, actually more now with this really starting to fall apart, down more than 2%, 51.34 right there. But we do have a winner in the market, and it's Fitbit. Got an upgrade this morning. That stock is rallying almost 3%. And you got to check out the shares of Alibaba because that Chinese juggernaut, one of the biggest IPOs in history, now the shares are hitting an all-time low. Broke key support at 80 bucks. And while the world watches Greece, there's an even bigger problem brewing, and that's in China. Peter Marisi is an economist who happens to be a big critic of China. Peter, a lot of people saying what we're seeing now with their stock market is the final act in a long, drawn-out play that's masked a lot of problems, but now they got to face them.
Absolutely. I mean, the Chinese stock market bubble was based on buying on margin, and people were borrowing from the banks, which means these margin calls are coming from the banks, and there's a liquidity crisis at the banks. The kinds of measures the government has put in place and private brokers have put in place are the very kinds of measures that have been used in the United States and failed at the beginning of financial crises. You know, brokers getting together, putting together a pool of money to buy stock to supposedly support prices, when in reality the sums of money involved are like a teacup, you know, trying to empty the South China Sea.
What does China do? Are they wasting their time trying to prop up this market? To your point, should they continue to try to prop up banks and make sure that there's liquidity for bank runs rather than caring about the nuances of the market?
Well, I don't know that they should care about stock investors that much, but they should care a great deal about their banks. And they have latitude that we don't have in the United States. After all, the Communist Party can direct the government, or the government can direct the People's Bank of China, which is not an independent entity, to just turn around tomorrow morning and buy some stocks to prop up the banks, or to put in whatever capital is necessary. Their analog of the Treasury, the Finance Ministry, doesn't have to go to Congress to get permission to create a TARP. It can just do it. In the short term, that can patch things over. Yeah. But the reality is that China is a house of cards. It's built on financial chicanery.
You know, Peter, Professor, thanks so much for joining us. Government spending is counted in economic growth figures, right? China's been investing a lot in infrastructure, and there could be a property market crash there. China's trying to get more of its consumers active in its economy. Why does it matter to the United States?
Well, simply because China's export model hurts the U.S. manufacturing sector and is slowing U.S. growth. We would probably be growing 3 or 4% a year if China was running itself properly and essentially not exporting unemployment, much as the Germans do to Greece. That's the basic problem, and that's why we should be concerned. Unfortunately, this kind of crisis, and 30% is a crisis when you can't turn it around, will cause China to revert back to those schemes. Desperate for cash, manufacturers will export it below cost. Again, stuff will start showing up at the Walmart that makes no sense. Stuff will show up where the cost of the materials on world markets is lower than the retail price at the Walmart.
Peter, let's talk about worst case scenario, because a lot of people have said this for a long time. It's a house of cards, but I need to understand, and I think the audience does, what are we looking at? What happens when the final card falls? What does it mean for us?
Well, we don't know that the final card will fall. I think a good analog to this would be like the Japanese lost decade. You know, as Japan started to melt down, the world did not end for the United States. And I would not assume that there would be a contagion. The only thing I would assume is that this is something, or say, is this is something that we should be focused on as a country and at the Treasury Department and at the Fed, with much more concern than events in Greece, where, frankly, Greece failing is like Rhode Island not being able to pay its debts.
Which, by the way, they can't. All right.
No, they can't. In fact, I think, you know, there are a lot of Greeks in Providence, and I think that, you know, maybe a sister-to-sister relationship with Athens might solve the problem.
It might. All right, buddy. Thanks a lot. We love your expertise. We'll talk to you again real soon. Want to move on now to the race for the White House. The GOP field having to answer a lot of questions about Donald Trump. Of course, the media has been slamming him, but some controversial comments from Bernie Sanders. Well, they're getting a huge free pass. Cheryl Cosoni is here, and she joins us to talk about this double standard.
Good morning. Well, they obviously know that they need to make sure that they appease Latino voters, and every single GOP candidate now is coming out and making sure that that's exactly what happens.
Well, we understand that part, but what about the crazy things that Bernie Sanders have said and some of the things he's written in the past? He goes into areas like rape, and you never hear anyone ask Hillary Clinton, hey, what about this nut that's gaining